you're a business owner, you've had podcasts for quite some time, and you're wondering, why isn't the podcast reaching more listeners? And you're thinking to yourself, like, is this even worth it? How do I make sure that if I invest more time, effort, and money into the show, I actually get a return? Now, if you're having those concerns, I wanted to share 3 simple things you can start doing today in order to make sure that you stack the odds in your favor so you don't waste another month, another year on the podcast without seeing more growth for your show. So the 3 tips are really this. The first one is to make sure that when you put out a piece of content, you are clear on the exact target listener you want to attract with your show. Because there's no point having great conversations with amazing guests or doing solo episodes on your own if you aren't crystal clear on exactly who you're talking to. I know this sounds so basic and so fundamental, but I've got to say, after working with 400 plus business owners and experts, this is the piece that so many people actually completely miss, which is, if you want to grow the show, you need to be clear on the listener you're trying to reach. Who is the target you're trying to reach? Most people don't actually know the listeners they're trying to reach with their show. Now, this creates a massive problem, and it leads to you wasting years on a podcast because you're not clear on who you're trying to market the show to. Now, if you don't have that clarity around who to market the show to, how are you going to present the podcast in the best way to attract the right people? How are you going to present the podcast in the way that's going to stand out and speak to your target audience? How are you going to present it in a way that actually attracts them? The problem is you won't, because you don't really have a target. You're just having great conversations, having fun, treating it like a hobby, but that's not really a business, you know? So I think if you want to understand more of who your target listener should be, just think to yourself, if you have a offer, a program, who exactly is the perfect buyer you're trying to get for your program? That really should be identical to the listener you want to attract with your show. Because when you can attract and market the podcast targeting the perfect buyer for your business, it now means you're not just growing an audience to grow an audience, you're actually growing an audience of people who would buy your stuff. I remember we had a client called Martin, and for the longest time, he had a podcast all about acting, and it was general and, you know, all of that good stuff. And he spent years in a show, wasn't growing, barely making any money. And it wasn't until we got his podcast far more focused and was specifically targeting actors who were struggling to get into SAG-AFTRA. So basically to land their first big, on-screen gig. And that was the main thing he focused on. Those were the people who he could work with as clients. So we changed the entire podcast to target those people. We actually changed his podcast name, and we also changed the topics he covered on the show. What this did is it made the podcast way more specific to that target listener. It meant that it was way easier for him to grow the podcast in his reach and attract more of the right listeners and be able to make more money when he reached those listeners, because he was clear on his target audience and he made it the perfect buyer for his programs. So that's the first thing. Get clear on who you actually want to reach for the podcast. If you don't have that in place, likely it is you're going to keep struggling to grow because you don't really know who you're trying to reach in the first place. The second thing, once you're clear on that target listener, start really obsessing over the problems they're going through. Don't just think about, oh, I'm just going to talk about topics about what I think they're going to be interested in. What you want to do is you want to look at the market, you want to look at LinkedIn posts, you want to look at Google Trends, you want to look at YouTube videos. You really want to start studying your niche, start studying other creators who are talking to the audience you want to attract to your perfect buyers. Start becoming like this scientist, this data analyst that's consuming data and getting a good grasp of what your market, meaning what your listeners, your audience, your customers, what they're consuming, what topics are they interested in. Now, once you have that clarity, then you can start deciding what topics to cover on your show based on data of what's proven to gain demand. This is exactly how you ensure you don't waste your time on content that won't drive leads and sales for your business. This is how you ensure you create binge-worthy content that nurtures the right audience without you having to have crazy long conversations or without you having to guess and hope. There's a predictable way to actually look at the market based on what the demand is and then build content based on that. Now, a few things will happen. Number one, your show will grow way faster because you're covering content based on demand rather than just guesswork or what your guest wants to talk about. Number two, because you're talking about the topics your audience is interested in, as long as it's focused on the pain points and your content is positioned as the solution to their problems, when you listen, discover your show and go through your back catalog, when every single episode feels like it's made for them, because it is, they'll binge your content, they'll become nurtured, and they'll want to reach out and actually work with you. And then the final piece, which is so important, is when you have a content strategy that's focused and based on demand, that positions you as an authority. Well, then it says, when you have that, it positions you as an authority. And the show is now less about you and what you want to talk about. It's now about serving your audience. And I'm not saying talk about all the stuff you don't want to talk about in your podcast. No, you still have to have fun, but it needs to be the blend between what the market actually needs and wants and desires and what your area of expertise in. Where those two overlap, that really is the sweet spot. And the final piece you need if you want to stop wasting time on the podcast without getting more of an ROI is you need to understand how listeners discover shows. I've stressed this so many times. Podcast SEO is something you can't afford to ignore, because by you ignoring it means you're posting content that isn't being found, that isn't being discovered, and you're hoping people stumble across your content and buy your stuff, but that never happens. If your show isn't optimized to rank on Apple and Spotify through podcast SEO, people won't find you. You have the best content on planet Earth, but you waste your time and you waste your money and your resources on a show that isn't actually optimized to be discovered. So focus on Apple and Spotify in order to grow significantly faster. Now, what I'm going to do, I've actually created a different video talking about podcast SEO, what it is. I'm going to link it here somewhere and it will take you to that video next. There's a similar link to this. But again, I want to record these 3 simple things you can start doing today in order to grow way faster. The first one, get crystal clear in the target listener you want to reach with your podcast. Don't just think about the perfect buyer. If you don't have this, good luck hitting the target when you don't know who you're trying to reach. The second piece, look at the market, become a data scientist, really create content based on demand. That way you don't waste your time on content that won't generate more leads or sell for your business. And this way you can actually position yourself as an authority in your space. And finally, if you want to grow your podcast way more and get way more listeners, you need to actually fix your discoverability problem. And the way you do that is by getting your podcast ranked on page 1 of Apple Podcasts and Spotify for the specific terms your audience would use to find a podcast like yours. Guys, I've got to say, you can tell it's been a long day. It's been a long day. I'm not going to lie. It's been a very long day. It's currently, you can actually probably see this. I'm recording in the studio. It looks like an absolute mess. But we're getting in the studio. Me and Ty, we're currently living together in Cambridge. Oh, I don't know what's happened there. I'm just going to connect this back up. Not too sure what happened there. So yeah, me and Ty, we're changing up the studio. So creating a new studio for us to record in, getting the walls painted. The first round was done today. The guys came round, took a look at it. It looked awesome. And then on Friday, they're going to come round, do the second coat, and then we're going to get some fancy stuff in the studio. It's going to look legit, guys. It's going to look super legit. So stay tuned for that. But anyways, it's getting late. Once again, it is 20 minutes to 10. But I thought I'd record this quick video for you so you actually get more clarity as far as how to make sure you don't waste time on the wrong strategies, but reach significantly more listeners and generate more sales and ROI from your podcast. If you have any questions, as usual, feel free to reply to this email, and I'll catch you guys in a bit.